This week, Gary Golomb of Awake Security joins us for our feature interview in startup articles and discussion even changing prospects' minds, the MVP paradox, commodifying SaaS, and what do boards actually do? Anyways, we cover updates from ForgeRock and our startup journeys. We'll be giving you an update at the end. All that and more on this episode of Startup Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by, make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV's courses live and on demand worldwide, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Their team solution provides access to a supervisor portal for full control over your team's training schedule and group analytics. Go to itpro.tv/startup security and use the code SS30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. To learn more about IT Pro TV's team solution, sign up for a free demo of their supervisor portal. Welcome to Startup Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, reporting on the startup news and interviews and other such fun startup things for Friday, September 8th, 2017. This is episode 54. G-Unit Studios, where cables get a little wonky always. Did you hear me? Did I cut out or did my headphones cut? I'm not sure what cut out just there, but someone who's not going to cut out and is going to stay here for the whole show because he's the beach bum himself, Mr. Michael Santarcangelo is here with us. How'd you like that for a radio transition?
I really liked it. You know, for a while here, I thought that I'd be hanging out with Jim Cantori and we could do the show together, but it turns out the hurricane is tacking westward, and I will be here for the whole show. I have nothing to distract me.
So you're not gonna get hurricaned on?
Doesn't look like it. I mean, you know, we'll get rain.
Yeah,
we'll get some wind.
Wet wind. We call that wet wind.
Yeah. No other things, which is good. I mean, I'm sorry for the people that are in the path of it, but and it's interesting too. You know, when you look at it, a lot of times we talk about this. There are startups that have to think about like the safety of their employees. And if you're a startup, that means you got to take your foot off the pedal for a little bit. There's security operations centers that have to figure out how to maintain operations. And it's there's a lot going on. So there'll be a lot for us to be able to talk about, including the stuff with Gary. He's got some insights too.
I hate taking my foot off the pedal. Like, I'm one of those people, like when I play like a racing like arcade game, like it's pedal to the metal the entire time.
Exactly right.
There's no break. There's no letting off the pedal. It's just pedal to the metal the entire time.
I find the same thing works when you go go-karting. Just hammer it, just push it down. I mean, the likelihood of really getting hurt is not that high, so just go.
Yeah, live free. Make sure you visit itpro.tv/startup security. Use the code SS30. Try it free for 7 days. Receive 30% off. Use the supervisor portal, which I am just in love with. This is an awesome idea, and I see it as an emerging trend in IT training. Your employer can manage your training experience. They can assign modules. They can track your progress so that you have more time. That's my goal for you as an employer, to give your employees more time to do some training because it's important for a whole lot of reasons, career advancement, and really the health of your company. Making sure your employees are trained up. They've got lots of different training modules at IT Pro, everything from project management to Metasploit. Talk about running the gamut. So make sure you check out our fine friends at IT Pro TV. All righty. Michael, why don't you introduce our guest for today?
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We've talked about Awake Security now a couple times, and you and I both have looked at it differently, and I had a chance to talk to Gary a couple weeks ago. In fact, Gary's Slapshot is running on my column this week, and it's perfect setup for the stuff we're going to talk about. So Gary Golomb is joining us from Awake Security. He's one of the co-founders of Awake Security. Tremendous amount of experience in it was one of those kind of conversations where we got talking about the SOC, And I had talked to him prior to our Enterprise Security Weekly episode last week, where we talked about SOCs and SOC management and a lot of the stuff. And Gary's the one who said to me, Michael, I went and I asked people about their jobs, and I listened to them, and I won't take Gary's thunder away. It was really interesting in that approach. And so I said, well, you got to come on the program. You got to talk to us about it. And of course, you brought it up. So Gary, we're glad you're here. Welcome to Startup Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. So, it's funny. I get drawn in immediately to your Marine Corps experience, but what we should probably talk about is some of the SOC stuff. I mean, what we always look at in this, first of all, Awake took a huge round. Like, it was almost like you guys ran stealth and then just popped up big round a couple months ago and hit the ground running big. So, on this program, we talk about all sorts of things. At some point, I'd like to talk about that and your experience. And you were early in at Cylance and you're in at Proventsure. So you've got a lot of stuff here that has worked its way up into different places. But I want to talk about the SOC for a little bit too, because one of the things that we look at on this program is innovation. And so we have people that are watching this that are investors. We have people that are security leaders, but we also have people that are in the SOC. And I want to start with your experience. And I actually want to start with what prompted you to ask people how they describe their jobs. Like, tell us a little bit about that experience and what you learned when you started doing that with people.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. So it was, as you mentioned, it was kind of this really interesting case study. I mean, I think there were several things that led to it. First of all, just part of the work that we did with Awake. Wow. Okay. Here I'm in witness protection now.
You do like you're in witness protection.
Now you can obfuscate your voice.
That's it.
Yeah.
You're not moving enough.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. How is that for timing? Wow.
Yeah. Huh?
Okay. So anyways, one of the things that we did, I think, that we started talking about last time, one of the things we did with Awake was we spent a lot of time investigating SOCs. It means analyzing analysts, where we'd embed for literally days at a time, say next to tier 1 analyst and then tier 2 and tier 3 analysts and SOC managers, really understanding their workflows, literally click by click, not just documenting each click, but understanding what the questions are that people are trying to answer when making these clicks, right? So there's a very extensive process we went through. I mean, we even started getting into like cognitive profiling of analysts, what separates not only security people from other people in IT, but what separates people in defensive, analyst type positions from even their peers in offensive positions. And a lot of that work was done to make sure we were designing a product that really matched the profile of the people using it, just making sure we really understand the base. But as we started going out and talking about the work we did, it was very interesting to see the response we got. And I think that's one of the things that prompted the question. So for several months, what I did is every time we went into a SOC, which would be several times a week in a lot of cases, I'd ask the question, how do you, what adjectives would you use to describe your work? And not once did I ever hear a positive word. It was always words like demoralizing and tedious and mundane and a lot of things like that. We spent a lot of time really trying to understand that, but it was just very shocking to see, because I have this memory of, when you think back to like the 90s, early 2000s, and even into the mid 2000s, doing the work, like those weren't the words we used to describe the work. The work was exciting. It was fun. It was sexy. It's, it's what pulled a lot of us into the industry in a lot of ways. So, pretty stunning to see that difference there. But and it makes sense. Like, when you watch what analysts, when you compare analysts today to the work we did 10, 15, almost 20 years ago, it is very different today. Back then there were a much smaller number of tools that maybe were a little bit more broad in terms of what they did. But when you watch analysts and what they do now, there's statistics out there that show that on average analysts use about 35 different tools after they pull an alert off the SIM or some other system. So between pulling an alert off and making a decision, they have to jump through about 35 different tools. We have certain customers we've seen where that number goes up to 75, in very well-funded SOCs. And the thing there is that, these tools are designed to alert or identify or block or correlate or label. Ultimately machine learning is all about just labeling data, but they're not designed to investigate. And that creates a cascade of problems from there that has real material impact, both on the people doing the work, but on the organization and the people who are responsible for managing risk. So here, for example, like if we kind of dissect this and pull this apart a little bit, one of the things that we found that really surprises a lot of people is that this could happen in the organization that we were looking at, or a lot of times analysts have experienced this in the past and they kind of carry the scars forward. But if you've ever been in that seat, you've been an analyst and you've had to make a decision, right? You pull something, whether it's off the SIM or off a sensor or off something else, but you have to make a decision. And that decision, vendors tend to think about it as it's just false positive, true positive, right? Make a decision and life moves on. But no, actually the decision that analysts are making are, am I going to take your computer away from you, interrupt whatever business processes you're involved in, kick off whatever political battles can ensue from there, which is not entirely uncommon. Am I going to do that or not? And if you've ever been an analyst and you've ever been wrong, right, where you say, yes, this computer is compromised, and it turns out it's not. So the computer comes back to desktop management or support or wherever it's going to go. And it's ultimately determined that you were wrong about the decision. You learn real fast to never make that mistake again. And so what we find is that analysts are actually incentivized not to take action unless whatever it is they're looking at is just plain as day, like it's Zeus, it's ransomware. There's no question about there's a problem here. We need to respond to it. We're really good about responding to those types of things as an industry. The things that are more subtle, there's a lot of cases where analysts are actually incentivized not to take action on those things, and then those are the things that, of course, turn into investigators dropping in at a later date with crazy bill rates and everything like that. So. Anyways, there's a lot of kind of interesting characteristics I think emerge from what we see and kind of the state of affairs out there today.
Gary, how much of the problem did you identify before you started talking to SOCs? Like, did you know there was a SOC problem, and what did you want to understand better specifically, or did you not know and you're like, I know there's a SOC problem, let's go figure it out?
So it was both. We knew a bit coming into it, and where a lot of those learnings came from is so I've kind of bounced around between or moved between roles in the vendor space where I've been focused on either endpoint or network, investigative technologies and research and development and things like that. But there's kind of a catch-22. Being a vendor, being in the vendor side is fantastic. You get to go out there, develop relationships with people across all kinds of different industries, see how different companies approach things, and it's really like a special kind of experience to have. The catch-22 though is you're developing solutions to real-world problems, but you're not in the real world, right? Like a vendor's lab is not what's happening out there, right? So because of that, I've also been very kind of rigorous in ensuring that throughout my career I spent a lot of time doing incident engagements and consulting and that type of work. Being on the other side of the fence and really drinking our own medicine. And the neat thing about the investigative work is you really are focused on the gap, right? Where if you're doing an investigation, it's because everything else had failed up to that point. In doing that work, it was one of the things that we noticed was at the end of an engagement or an investigation, you create this report with the who, what, when, where, why, how. Of course, the who is best guess most of the time, but you create this very detailed report that has all this information in it. And what's kind of stunning to see is you drop in after the fact, right? In many cases, 4 years, several years after the breach happened, all this activity took place over this time. And so the information is there, and you consistently see humans can get to it and generate it and collate it and correlate it and draw conclusions from it. But it's a very manual, very, very time-consuming, labor-intensive process. And if you do it long enough, you realize that a lot of it is fairly repetitive, meaning it can be put into technology, right? So we came into this with that kind of mindset, that there's a lot of things humans do that machines are not doing, and this kind of gets to there's things machines do well, there's things humans do well, and I think in our industry, in the security industry, we need to detangle those things quite a bit more for the sake of the entire industry. And so that was part of it. But then when we went in and we started doing the work, that Awake did specifically around like investigating SOCs and developing a solution around this kind of problem space, one of the things we really wanted to understand was kind of the user and how people tend to, like, if we're going to focus on people, we're going to focus on the way they make decisions, we need to really understand how they think, what types of information they use to make decisions, what types of questions they ask, which is very different, by the way, from, we had to spend a lot of time pulling apart, if you sit next to somebody and you ask them what question they're asking when they make a click, well, a lot of times they're asking, it's not the question they want to ask or the question they want an answer to. Really, they're asking a question that the tool allows them to ask, right? And so there tends to be a delta or a gap between those two things, right? So we really wanted to get down to, okay, your hands are tied using all these different, 35 different tools, which ironically are really spread across only 3 data sets, right? There's the network, the endpoint, and aggregated logs. So you start to see, these very hyper-focused technologies and how this affects the investigative process for folks. But we really wanted to understand, how they think and how they're going after things. And
Gary,
that was
something that just struck me as you were talking that I think is really interesting, having been a SOC analyst and have this been my daily life. Every time I got into work, I'd have to look at logs and packets, which is awesome. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, as a nerd, yeah. I love that kind of stuff. But I think your observation that the tools don't necessarily answer your question. They answer a question, but I feel like SOC analysts kind of get down the rabbit hole. They subconsciously, the question you want to ask and what, answer you're looking for, but you can only ask other questions, and you have to sometimes ask a half a dozen or more questions just to get to your original one. So it's like, how deep down that rabbit hole do I have to go until I get to, I just want to know what this particular thing looked like at this time. And you can't get there, so you ask about, well, what did that other thing look at this time, and what did this thing look like that was somewhat related? And that's, I think, a lot of the pain points for SOC analysts today is that they don't get to ask the questions they want to ask. They get to ask 18 other questions that maybe get them an answer.
Yeah, so like what you're hitting on right there, to me, it spans so many problem areas that we talk about as an industry, but we don't tend to associate with that being the source of the pain or the problem, right? And so yeah, there are that many different tools, and people tend to watch analysts do exactly what you just described. And, that's when we start getting to skills crisis conversations and things like that. And I would actually put out there that I think that this, there's a variety of reasons for why we have a skills crisis, but I think a pretty significant percentage of it, to me, is almost artificially created by the tools, right? And so, for example, again, 35 different tools, basically 3 data sets, more or less, that you're looking at. We could look at a couple different ways. But so, of course, all these tools are very hyper-focused on some very specific thing, and we have to piece that together. But the problem's worse than that, because these tools that we're talking about, they were designed almost across the board, all of them. They were designed to like we said, identify, alert, block, label. They were designed to, in many ways, create alerts. We could just say that generically and simply, not investigate those alerts, right? And we find that analysts and teams are actually not equipped. They have all kinds of technology, and at the end of the day, they're not equipped with anything to actually investigate the things that those technologies are telling them. So what do? You're forced to go to all these other tools to kind of cross-correlate. Again, not designed to investigate, these alerts from other tools either, in most cases. And we have to pick these really, almost arcane kind of data points from each one, piece it together, and try to tell a story from that, which is not only unbelievably time consuming, and we see that in the metrics when we go look at SOCs and we go just look at industry statistics around how many alerts or potential types of threats that teams get through. It's a very small percentage of what they're actually logging, and again, we know that from kind of reports that you see out of breach cases. But yeah, so it's not only very time consuming, it's very error prone, right? And this ties directly into
well, you can go down a rabbit. So when I worked for a university, for example, it kind of took me back to when I worked for a university, and I had to do incident investigation, and using the tools that I had at the time. This is maybe 10 plus years ago, and what I would do is I would get an alert from something, right, from some source, and I'd say, "Wow, that's kind of interesting. That could be a security concern." My first question most of the time was, I started with, well, what is that? Like, what generated the alert? And and I think it's not just a university problem. I think most organizations, the analysts, you have no idea what that is. But having the context of what it is would answer your problem. Because after I went through all the manual work, which sometimes involved calling people on the phone, right? Because you have departments in the university that are just standing stuff up all over the place. And you come down and be like, that's like, oh, that's our mail server. I'm like, oh, well, that alert totally makes sense then, if that's your mail server. I'm like, no worries. Or sometimes they'd be like, oh, that's the old machine that, has Windows XP that runs some equipment. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's definitely compromised, right? But until I could answer that question, like, what is that? And I feel like your solution, that's really, when I listen to you and others in your organization talk about it, that's the pain point it hits for me, is it helps me as an analyst answer that question, what is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not only what is that, but so I'm totally into packets and protocols and all those things, too. That's at the end of the day, that's where a lot of my work is focused on. But when you are faced with a stack of things you need to go through, you don't start with packets and protocols and metadata about those things. You start at the top, right? Because you have a whole bunch of things you need to go through. So a lot of times the first question is just like, who is this person? Like, how relevant is this in the first place? Because again, you pull something off the queue, there's more things behind it. You are constantly, the thing that's in the front of your mind, actually more than a lot of technical questions, is how much more time should I spend on this before moving on to the next thing? Yeah. Right. And so that's, and there's so many examples where understanding who the person is and their role in the organization is so critical too, right? You think about phishing versus spear phishing, understanding what that person, the type of work they do in your organization, which is way beyond what you can get out of Active Directory labels or things like that. Understanding how they behave in the organization, types of information they work with and what they do with it, is almost one of the first things you need to know before you even get it, because that will help you make sense of, well, does this alert or does this data point correlate to this type of person in the first place, right? And then you go from there, which is that thing. It's almost impossible to investigate something in isolation, right? It's what other types of data, what other types of behavior around that to support the assertion that it's bad, right? I mean, that's one of the interesting things about the work. I think that's one of the coolest things about the work, actually, over the past couple of decades, is how, the need to understand business justified versus not business justified has become such an important requirement for the analysis process. And I'm not sure that it was such a prominent feature, earlier in the earlier days of doing this type of work.
What also I find interesting, Gary, about your technology and your point of view of the problem, and this is my point of view of your point of view of the problem, right, is I think that most organizations, maybe all organizations, we all as security professionals say, hey, look, you need to know what's on your network, what systems there are, what protocols they talk, what applications you have, how they talk, and you need to know, well, who uses all of that technology and who's supposed to use it and who's not supposed to use it, right? It gets into asset management and identity and access management. You got to know, we always say know your network, but it's more than just the network. You have to know all of the systems, all of the people, where everything is. Nobody knows that today. It's really the estimation that I get, is that no organization out there that's grown to any substantial size, even smaller organizations, nobody knows that. I mean, I manage it on my small network here. We had an intern start, and I'm like, no, dude, there's no DHCP on the Ethernet. He's like, what? What do you mean? I'm like, because I got to keep track of what people plug in, and that's just one way that I do, do that. You scale that out. There's no way anyone can do asset management and discovery, and then put on top of that who should have access to what, and really have 100% running view all the time as that stuff changes, I think it's impossible. And that's one of the reasons why I like your solution, is because you can draw some of that context on the fly. And I think that's really hitting on a problem that we have in our industry today.
Yeah, no. We had this conversation very, very early on in the life of the company with a friend, a guy I know who affiliated with NASA, and one of the things that we were talking about in terms of prioritizing, the work you're doing and how you make decisions. One of the problems he was hitting on is, I can look in, some directory service and I can see that this person works in this department, but that doesn't tell me anything, right? I don't know how to differentiate the importance of the people in those departments. And there's nobody in the security team who's a theoretical physicist or an astrophysicist, right? We don't have those people. So I don't know how to even make sense. You can show me the data and the information, but I don't actually know how to make sense of that. And that actually starts to lead into kind of a more subtle problem, but actually a really big problem that enterprise experience every day. And I think this is kind of one of the exciting aspects of the technology for me. And that is, when you look at sort of the difference between junior analysts or more entry-level people and senior analysts, and especially the type of people who drop in as investigators, when you kind of study how they make decisions and how effective they are, what you find is they actually make decisions almost equally effectively. If you remove the process of needing to find the information and you just put the information in front of, and by the way, this is confirmed across all kinds of industries. There've been lots of studies in the airline industry for many decades on this difference between entry-level pilots and seasoned captains of planes. It's what separates these two groups actually is something called procedural knowledge. So it's just the ability to get to the information. But if you present the information, even junior analysts do understand business justified, not business justified, and they can make sense of that data, right? And so really focusing on that and putting here we go, witness protection again. Putting that information in front of the analyst, it not only totally powers up the junior analyst. So like one of the most exciting things I've seen with our product, well, there's a handful, but one of the things that got me personally excited was seeing an entry-level analyst who had never looked at packets before his current job, which started only a couple months before we got involved with this company. Never looked at network traffic and doing very sophisticated investigations, like looking ultimately into a case that was a industrial espionage case. Presenting them the information and watching them be successful, totally awesome. Watching senior level investigators get in front of it and be able to do things, within minutes that took hours or really days before. That's exciting too. But really, seeing the newer folks get to do the exciting, fun, sexy type of work that we got to do, when we first got into this is for me personally just a very kind of fulfilling thing to see.
What I'm loving listening to you too is. That's exciting from a business perspective. Wait, you mean I'm not just chasing false positives? Or, yeah, look, another virus got in. Like, it's espionage. It's somebody doing something where, like, you're actually protecting the company, which means when it's time to go back to the executives of the board and report on the value that you're contributing, a lot easier to show them something of substance, which it's great for the person who's doing it. And you're right, it's exciting if somebody who's kind of newer at it is empowered to go make a difference. But I'm listening to it too from a business perspective and say, wait, so you're freeing me up as a human, as a person, to go do something that's meaningful, that's elevated in the organization? That's pretty awesome.
There's kind of a funny so there was another case we looked at, different company, and it was one of the other espionage type cases. Actually, not type. It was actually confirmed by the company for us, but. One of the things that was interesting about that I hadn't seen before was it was actually within the first couple hours of using the product. We discovered this person who was sending out files that looked like pretty much the most sensitive type of data this organization had, and it turned out. We learned later that basically what this person was doing was when files were emailed to them, and only when they were emailed, they would save the file off and then use a side channel to upload it, right? So they weren't trouncing all over some file share somewhere, being really noisy. It was just very passively, if you emailed something to me and it was interesting, that would go out to this other organization through a different means. Okay. So we go back to the organization, we tell them about this, and the response back to us initially was, no, it's okay. It's business justified. We have people that actually do need to share that particular kind of data out externally, and that particular source, which was in Asia, we have locations all over the place, so not a big deal. It's okay, and what we were able to do, because one of the things the technology does is it not only takes the data we have and translates it into more of a human mental model. It represents the information the way people think about it. Again, not packets and protocols, but people and devices and behaviors. But then we also do like similarity analysis and group devices and people by their activity and behavior, so that you can compare. And so we were able to go back to the customer and say, yeah, we see what you're saying. We see the people who do what looks like business justified, because there's a group of people that do very similar things. These types of files, this type of data, these types of locations, they all do that. But this person, the people they're most similar to, do nothing like what we see here. They don't even they don't talk to these locations. So it was a very different type of comparison. And the customer kind of went silent for a little while and came back with a lot of questions and thanked us for following up on it. But I guess what made me think of that was what you were talking about, and that there are these more subtle issues here around. Again, a lot of the espionage types of cases we hear about, again, they tend to be kind of obvious, like remote access backdoors. And again, those are the types of things we could be higher confidence about. But, really, business and business justified is a huge issue in making decisions, for even the lowest level of analyst. And as an industry, we haven't compensated for that very well.
Michael, more questions for Gary?
We've talked a lot about the problem, right? So one of the things that Paul and I have done recently is we've talked about categorization. We're in love with the book Play Bigger and the idea of defining your own category. And I think what you've just demonstrated for the people following along with us is falling in love with the problem publicly. I mean, you've described it well. You've gone through it. You guys have spent a lot of time and effort on that. So when you go out to somebody now and you say, okay, hey, I'm from Awake Security, how do you explain the problem that you solve? What problem are you solving?
I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to two things, right? First of all, when we're talking with enterprises, we actually can talk with them about the metrics they already have. So we can frame the conversation just like, let's start with your own measurements, and let's talk about the problem. Not how we prescribe or how we see it, but what you're experiencing. And when we go through these metrics, a lot of time what we see is, you look at the number of events that get closed out, in an average enterprise, and it's actually very small. There's again a lot of statistics in the industry around this too. About 5%. But it's kind of the average out there. Yeah, for the number of alerts or things that ultimately get looked at by a human being who needs to make a decision on whether we're going to do something about that or not. And so the first part of the problem is that, and the people that tend to do that type of work, which we could call alert investigation, tend to be more the more junior analysts, right? It's very time consuming, both from the number of tools that they have, right? Because they have to piece together this information like we were talking about earlier. But that also creates a burden on the more senior analysts who have to do a lot of a review. They call it kind of the alert stream from, T1 alert stream. And so that's part of the problem. So we address it by actually pre-computing a lot of information. So we don't rely necessarily on the user to come in and know what questions to ask. We pre-computed the answers across a wide variety of ways of looking at behavior and just present that so they can immediately start making decisions on that. And it really accelerates both accelerates and makes the tier one or the lower tier folks a lot more, accurate and effective. But the second is really dramatically expanding the insight and efficiency of your senior level analysts as well, right? And so the way we hear this, in the industry is you hear organizations talk about how they know they need to do proactive discovery of threats that are being missed by automated approaches, right? Which we could call hunting. So they know they need to do this, but we frequently hear we either don't have the people or the skills, or we don't have the time to do it if we do have, right? Because their time is being consumed, focused on these other things that are overly time consuming. And so that's ultimately, those are the two things we focus on. And it's funny, like I said, when we go into SOCs, we can work off their own metrics, or we go into an enterprise, so we can work off their own metrics and show how they're being impacted just through their own numbers in these two areas. And what's exciting about starting with those as the metrics is when we come in and we do, proof of concepts, we already have points of measurement to start with, where we can show, look, this is not, there's some really amazing technology here. It's exciting to talk about, but there's a purpose to it, right? We can measure it at the end of the day, and we can measure it, right up front. Here's where you should see improvements.
Who are you? So when you go in, and we don't have to run down this rabbit hole too far, but who's your champion then? Like when you bring this in, because as I'm listening to you, this sounds like the kind of thing that you could bring to the CISO, but you might find it's more in are you finding that you're coming to a lot of like just SOC operations, like security operations, or is it the DevOps, or is it Sec DevOps, or are you at the CISO level? Or are you coming at the executives? I know, and everybody's always trying to look at it differently, but I'm just kind of curious because you're offering something that's spanning a lot of different opportunities, even though you're centering it in the ability for the SOC to do better.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, that's a great question. So the very clear, the very clear sort of group of folks that, almost unanimously gets very excited when we start showing them, demos and going in and showing them data in their environments are the practitioners, are the people in the SOC, at all ends of the spectrum, both entry level to senior tiers. They get it immediately. We have these really fun conversations all the time. So that's one group that's very obvious. At the other end of the spectrum, right? You have the executives, and although the solution is very focused on empowering and making people better, executives are also very aware, and you can see this in the metrics that they spend an enormous amount on technologies that do all the alerting and labeling and correlation and all of those things, but they still have a team of people that need to make a decision. Am I going to interrupt a business process by taking somebody's device away from them and, doing whatever ensues from there, depending on the organization, right? And that's the gap, right? And that's where things really slow down. That's where things start to get inaccurate. And so the risk that CISOs ultimately carry on their shoulders is really felt within that gap, the gap between all the technologies you have creating alerts and that decision that ultimately needs to be made by the team to take action or not, right? So there is, we can have these fantastically dynamic conversations with really people at all ends of the spectrum there.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's and the reason I bring that up is because a lot of times in security, the people that we're solving the problems for don't really have the authority to sign the purchase order. And one of the things that we like to point out on this program is that if you're listening and you kind of, that's me, don't be afraid to go make friends with people in procurement or start to take some of the stuff that we talk about instead of saying, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Listen, you may never be the leader in the organization because you don't aspire to that, and that's cool. But if you start to understand how these things work, then when you come across a really cool solution, you can advocate for it more effectively. So that's really cool. Gary, a couple questions that we like to ask people from time to time. You've had experience now in a couple different startups. Is that something that you're drawn to, or are you drawn to the startup, or are you drawn to the technology, or what is it that kind of keeps you going? And what I'm looking for here too is some insights for somebody else. Like if somebody else is looking at the startup life, is there a certain thing to it that you like that you want them to know about, or is it, don't know, what drives you, and how would that help somebody else listening in right now?
Oh boy, how many hours do we have left on the conversation?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. Yes. So, lots of aspects, right? And some of them are, some of them are probably a little more comical. I think we could throw a little bit of. There's at times nerd rage in there where, when you spend a lot of time in the field, right, and working on the actual problems, right, you start to see the gaps, and you start to see, basically, if you're experiencing frustrations in doing the work, that's a red flag, right? So it's something that either needs to be filled, and if you go out and you look and you can't find solutions for it, there's almost this frustration like this. Why is this problem not solved already? How has this not been solved already? And there's this sort of intrinsic drive to just go fix it. I think a lot of times that may start, on a small scale. You do it in the environment you're in, and if it works, and then other people hear about it, and they're interested in the same thing, then you ultimately need to make a decision about, putting it out there for the whole world and supporting it. And that was actually very much the story with Proventsure for me. There's other aspects of it too, though, which starts to get into, how do you define entrepreneurship and that particular those particular types of drives, and the startup journey is just the beginning of it is such a strong draw, because you go into it and you're creating something new, and really your existence day to day or week to week is defined by creating, and it's a very I'm kind of overusing this word here, but very, very just creative experience, right? And that is incredibly, it's just incredibly fun and fulfilling for me, and I think a lot of other folks I know who do this type of work. So those are two aspects of it. Another, I kind of mentioned earlier, but there's lots of jokes we can make about vendors and marketing and stuff like that, but it's also a fantastic place to be, because you do get to go. I mean, every week I get to go work, and sometimes quite intimately, with just a wide variety of companies across an incredible array of industries. One week you're really, one day you're working in defense, or maybe intelligence type communities. Next day it's healthcare, then retail, then so you just get this fantastic perspective that's also very humbling, right? Because you're going in, and that's, to be honest, something else I love about the work. You're going in, you're supporting people who are, who at the end of the day are doing it. You're not going to be there tomorrow. They are, right? And so, it really helps to just develop a lot of respect, like this implicit respect for the people you work with. And to me, that's also part of it. It's also a very fulfilling part of the work.
That's really cool. Paul, any other questions for you? Because this has been exciting.
No, I'm good. Gary, thank you so much for appearing on Startup Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you. Best of luck with Awake Security.
All right. Thank you, guys.
We'll be right back.